spoke like that. Woe! Woe to the shepherds. Might start using that. Let us now turn to Mark 6. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, Come away. Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to this deserted place by themselves. And now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. And as Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd. He had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them so many things. And after this, they had crossed over. They came to the land of Gennesaret and moored the boat. And when they got out of the boat, people again recognized him and rushed to him. And they began to bring their sick on mats and whatever else they had just to be near him. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid their sick at his feet, and they begged him that they might touch even just the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it would be healed. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Casey and I have been in a cleaning out mood this week, and one afternoon we took to the Calvary Library. Oh, yeah. I found several gyms, but I found this particular gym. This is a series of cassette tapes. What are those? Called How to Live Successfully in the 90s. Ken, I didn't ask you if I could throw those away or not. The tapes boast ways to strengthen family life, to launch the career of your dreams, to achieve financial stability, to live healthier, to deepen your spirituality, and I quote, to locate your personal power to change the world. We laugh, but these things aren't particular to the 90s. These are things we still want, always have, always will. For Aristotle, the aim of every human life was to achieve eudaimonia, a good and virtuous spirit, what we might call flourishing or reaching our highest potential. Today we've got a hashtag for eudaimonia. We say, hashtag living my best life. Like, I did goat yoga this morning, hashtag living my best life. Well, the people in Mark's gospel are no different than us. They wanted to live their best life. In today's story, we see just how desperate people are in seeking out help and fulfillment to live eudaimonia. Now, Mark's gospel gets to the point where the other gospel writers are wordy and beautiful and metaphorical. Mark goes to the raw story, showing us these people who are so desperate that they aren't just following Jesus, they're anticipating Jesus and the disciples, anticipating where he will be going next. And our story begins with absolutely exhausted, famished disciples. It's just spent from teaching and preaching and healing, and they're in desperate need of self-care. And so Jesus takes them to a deserted place, a wilderness place even, just a place to chill. What the scripture doesn't tell us, that you find out in a good bit of research, is that this deserted place is known to have been hot springs. It was a spa. It was like the Ritz. It's kind of secluded, right? And all the disciples and Jesus wanted to do was lounge. But even bone-tired, Jesus had compassion on these crowds because they dared show up. They dared show their true selves, their total and complete desperation, their vulnerability rather than virtuous spirits. We, with our TED Radio Hour and Brene Brown, we don't want to be like that. We best faces on Facebook, we update our statuses with vacations and promotions, and we make ourselves sound as erudite as possible when sharing our thoughts on politics. But it's hard for us to show our desperation. And if we do, it's even harder to do so in public. That's exactly what these people are doing. They're shoving through the crowds. These are good, normal people, right? They're people just like us, and they're shoving one another, crying out, laying it all on the line, just hoping Jesus will see them. I can't help but wonder when we hope Jesus will see us. We who like things orderly, we who scoff at the wrong kind of public emotions, we who get uncomfortable when things get awkward, when things get raw and real, when do we hope Jesus will see us? The thing is, we're always, and this is what we're supposed to do, we're always trying to point Jesus to others. And that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. We want Jesus to see the systematic oppressions in our world. We want him to not rest until there is no hopelessness. We want him to not rest until there is no racism, and until racism is not just a thing of the past, but there is reparation. We want him to walk along the shore and hold every sick person in his hand. But when do we need him? Desperately, fully, to turn and stop in his tracks for us. Told you all before that I like to follow the lectionary because I trust the wisdom in it. And this is a perfect example. It's been wonky the last couple of weeks. I'll give it that. But today is why I do it. Because it offers a fresh perspective and invites us into a different part of a well-known story. See, the scripture I read earlier is the lesser-known words of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with a miraculously few number of loaves and fishes. But that part got skipped today because we've been asked to focus on something else, on the bookends without the miracle. And if we'd read the whole story, there's no doubt I would have zeroed in on the miracle, on the glaring communion metaphor, because that's my favorite. I love communion. I love, as you all know, talking about Jesus coming and eating and drinking. But I would have missed the hunger, the drive to not so much flourish, but to be filled. Perhaps being left with the unmiraculous breadcrumbs of this story is exactly what the day calls for. To be force-fed the fact that we too are hungry and we are allowed to be desperate creatures. As our phones ring constantly, as emails pile up, when there are dinners to cook and laundry and laundry and laundry to fold. Yeah. There are books to read and doctors to call and different doctors to call and another appointment to be at, events to attend, church meetings. When there are an infinite ways out there to prove that maybe we're not measuring up, how are we not desperate? On our facade, we don't show ourselves like the crowds Mark tells us about. Believe it or not, today's congregations aren't trying to beat the pastor to where she is before she got there, just to hear from her. We aren't pushing one another out of the way to get communion. Wouldn't that be a sight? Even our liturgy suggests that we are calm and in control until the pastor pulls a fast one on you and makes you do confession jazzercise. Sorry, that's the 90s speaking. Yeah, some of you did jazzercise. Mark's message is that it's okay. You're okay. In desperation, to push yourself, to find that in fact we might be too sick, that we might not only be in need of a physician, but the great physician, who isn't afraid of our woundedness, of our tenderness, of even our silent desperation. In an article in the New York Magazine, writer Andrew Sullivan chronicles his work life and what it did to him. Does anybody know him? Any chance? So he was one of the first people who made blogging a big deal. In his own words, he said, "For a decade and a half, I've been a web obsessive, publishing blog multiple times a day, 7 times a week person. Each morning began with a full immersion of the stream of internet consciousness and news, jumping from site to site, tweet to tweet, breaking news story to the hottest take, and it was an unending dialogue that I was constantly in." He was praised, and he made a huge name for himself, not to mention a ton of money. He was relevant. He was relevant, but it took a toll. He began losing friends and relationships. His vacations were just sleep, because he didn't do that. His life was a constant barrage of information, and he started getting infections. And his doctor told him, "If you don't quit this, you will die." And so he said, "I'm getting back to being human again." He recreated friendships and made new ones. He found God and his own spirituality. And he found himself standing on the shore, pushing and shoving and begging Jesus to heal him. He is no longer that relevant. In Andrew's article, he writes directly to us, to the church. He says, "If churches came to understand that the greatest threat of faith today is not hedonism, but distraction to relevance, perhaps they might begin to appeal to a frazzled people." Christian leaders seem to think that they need more distractions, that their services have denigrated into emotional spasms, their spaces drowned with light and noise and bands. But maybe what the church needs is silence. That a quietness might actually draw those whose minds and souls have grown weary and desperate. Beloved, we do not have a band or flashing lights, thank goodness. But this is us, weary and distracted, and in need of Jesus, not just for others, but for ourselves, for our own weary lives. After all, how can we send Jesus to those who might be more desperate than us, without having first been there? How can we ask others to do this without having first been the people who lurched out after him? How can we send people to Jesus without having first needed to grab his robe and his attention for ourselves? Growing up Presbyterian in East Texas, I'd hear people talk a lot about their personal relationship with Jesus. Now, I went to church, as you all know. I read the Bible and definitely considered myself a Christian. But our relationship status? That was weird. It's taken me a lot longer to realize that there is a relationship status with Jesus. And this relationship with Jesus truly began when I started paying attention to the way Jesus spoke to me. I'm not talking about prayer, not the way I spoke to Jesus, but I'm talking about Jesus' attitude towards me, about what it finally took for me to get it. And what it took was for me to accept that Jesus was, as Mark says, moved by compassion for me. That Jesus was willing to let the miracle wait, to let the bread get stale and the fish a little stinky while he fed me. Because I was desperate and hungry. Turns out, still am, always will be. Sometimes the miracle isn't located in the grand dramatic moments, but in these bookends that we're look at. When we stop searching for how to be relevant in this decade and instead demand and crowd and beg for Jesus to touch us, to heal us, to make us whole, showing us that it's miracle enough just to be human. What if you imagine just for today that God says to you, "Oh, honey, there is nothing wrong with you. You're doing so well. And I've got time for you." That's what we longed to hear in the 90s. That's what we long to hear today. That our highest aim isn't relevance itself, but to be relevant to God. To the one who's never grown weary or tired of giving us our best life, just for being us. Amen.